The Allagan Empire is the largest, most advanced civilization to ever exist on Hydaelyn. At its peak, it controlled the entirety of the three great continents of Aldenard, Ilsabard, and Othard, in addition to the southern landmass of Mericidia and all the islands in between. The Empire's technology, magical prowess, knowledge, and might dwarf anything the people of Hydaelyn are capable of today. Machina and other relics left over from the 5,000-year-old Empire can still be used today with a bit of tinkering. Even more shockingly, the biochemical chimeras created by the Empire have descendants now walking the planet, unaware of their true origins. The Ixal are descended from the Ixalia, and the Ananta came from the Lamia. Mirrorites and Naga are likewise descended from Allagan chimera, though they never managed to evolve into a civilized culture the way the Ixal and Ananta have, and in fact, they have changed very little. Some chimera created back then are even still among us today, surviving for 5 millennia in relative isolation due to the incredible biochemical prowess the Empire possessed. The floating continent of Azizla still floats, its systems and machina still functioning, the imprisoned icons of Mericidia still contained within. Tomestones containing just scraps of ancient knowledge are highly sought after, collected feverishly by some of the strongest adventurers in the realm, and used as currency for some of the most advanced gear and equipment the cultures of Hydaelyn are able to produce. Magitech, for all the incredible weapons and tools it has created, pales in comparison to the capability of Allagan aetherochemistry, from which it was derived. We know plenty of how the Empire has influenced modern-day Hydaelyn, but how much do we know about the Empire itself? What kind of world was it when Zand was at the height of his rule? How did they use the marvels of aetherochemistry they created, and what were the events that led to their creation? And of course, how did so great an empire fall? I'm Lorekeeper Wilveren, and today we'll be digging into the records of ancient history, seeking answers to those very questions. At the conclusion of the Third Umbral Era, the people of Hydaelyn found themselves once again trying to build new societies from the ashes of old ones. Believing that the calamity of fire was the result of being too close to the gods and basing the entirety of their cultures on them, the people decided to change the focus of their faith. They didn't reject the gods, but instead decided to keep them at a safe distance, respecting them without devoting themselves to them entirely. As a result, their faith became focused on themselves, and the people sought to raise themselves up through their own will. Society advanced forward at an incredible pace, and a number of powerful individuals rose up, though one would stand above them all. Zand, by all accounts a genius even at a young age, gathered other powerful people to him and began to conquer the lands around his own. Zand valued both technology and magic equally, and specifically sought out powerful wielders of magic to join him. He gave them the title Mage and placed them in positions of power in his growing army, allowing them the freedom to practice and develop their magics, provided they used those magics in service to him. Their studies and the desire for conquest gave birth to an incredible power, one which would propel the Allagan Empire to greatness beyond anything the world had ever seen: aetherochemistry. As the name implies, it is a combination of magic and science, applying the principles of etheric manipulation to chemistry, biology, and machinery. Using aetherochemistry, the Allagan Empire was able to create siege weapons capable of delivering far more precise strikes at a much greater distance than conventional weaponry, wheeled cranes which could lift and move 10 times the weight of normal machines with a fraction of the manpower, and medical techniques and tinctures which made older methods of treating wounds and illnesses seem laughably ineffective by comparison. Territories fell quickly, and it wasn't long before the banner of Zand's empire hung in every corner of the three great continents. Once that was done, Zand and his mages turned toward bettering the lives of the Empire's citizens, and aetherochemistry was integrated into every aspect of normal life. One of the greatest wonders created by the Allagan Empire was the Circus Tower, a massive structure of glowing crystal. This tower was built to harness the aether of the sun's light and distribute it throughout the Empire, powering the growing number of machina used by its citizens. Using solar power allowed the Allagans to continue to use their magic and ether-powered machina without too heavily draining the life of the land, though it's unclear whether the Empire realized they were preserving the planet by harvesting the power of the sun's light. This was a golden age for the three great continents. United under the banner of the Allagan Empire, their lives eased by the miracle of aetherochemistry and machina being built and improved to constantly meet their every need, the Empire flourished. Zand, however, was becoming old and knew he wouldn't be around forever. He spent a great deal of effort and focus grooming his children to be strong, wise leaders who would keep the Empire going in a good direction once he was gone. When the time came, Zand passed from this world knowing he built the greatest empire in history, and had left it in good hands. 1,000 years passed, and the Empire slid down a slow but steady slope into a period of stagnation. The people's every need and want was met thanks to aetherochemistry. Any and all work was left to the machina to perform, and the people spent their days in luxury and leisure. People lacked the motivation to keep growing and improving. Why should they? There were no threats to face, no needs to be met. Life was perfect. But people need a certain amount of adversity, a goal to strive for and a reason to strive for it. Without a purpose, people begin to lose their will not only to seek greater heights and accomplishments, but to live. Despite the perfection of their world, suicide rates climbed as birth rates dropped. Mages who once worked tirelessly to improve the lives of the Empire's citizens were replaced by casual, coddled users of magic with no drive or passion. The same decline was seen in other positions of power in the Empire, including those who held local authority in its territories. Without the constant drive to improve and the burning pride and passion that once had fueled the Empire, it began to collapse under its own weight. Rebellions and small battles broke out in many places, and though the might of the Empire was great enough to crush them, it was a clear sign that things were only going to get worse. There were, however, those who still believed in the greatness of the Empire and would give their all to see it preserved. One such person was a technologist named Amon. Amon had already concocted elixirs to help improve the mental faculties of the Empire's citizens, but he soon came to realize that what the Empire needed was not more intelligence. If anything, the people had too much. Instead, he came to the conclusion that what the Empire needed more than anything was a powerful leader who could reignite the flames of pride and raise the Empire back to its former glory. He knew he was not that leader, and he also knew waiting around for such a leader to be born was futile, especially in the current climate of stagnation. And so, he decided that the only option was to defy death itself. He would resurrect the first Emperor Zand, and then, to ensure that the Empire would never be without the leader it needed, he would unlock the secret of immortality. As outrageous a goal as this is, aetherochemistry was closer to unlocking it than one would expect, particularly for a genius like Amon. At first, his experiments were performed on criminals and rebels, and many of them did not end well for the test subjects. But once he'd managed to get a handle on it, he moved on to the Emperor's own bloodline. He managed to create perfect physical copies of the Emperor's descendants, Une and Doga, which lacked any sort of spirit or sense of self. He dubbed these copies clones, and once he had learned all he could from them, he realized they were perfect slaves, and he employed them as such. Amon's research also included reaching deeper into the art of chimeromancy, or the art of combining multiple creatures into one, and several monsters were created as byproducts of his research. One of Amon's test subjects, a rival mage named Scylla, was tricked into becoming a test subject with the promise of eternal life and power. When she awoke after the operation, she discovered she had become far more powerful, but that the heads of hounds, the animal she loathed most in the world, had replaced her own head. Phlegethon, a rebel leader and hero to the common people, was captured and used in Amon's experiments as well, and though his physical form was greatly improved, his mind was twisted and degraded, and Amon employed him as a powerful, if unintelligent, guardian. Glacia Labolas was one of Amon's very few willing test subjects, a stalwart servant of the Empire who loved nothing so much as hunting down and crushing rebels. Amon's tests on him resulted in a relatively more favorable outcome. Powerful, essentially immortal, but darker, more cruel and vicious. Essentially, he got exactly what he needed. Amon even used himself in his experiments once he had made enough progress, and eventually, he reached his goal, discovering the secrets of vivimancy, or the magic of life and death. Amon used this new power to resurrect Zand, first Emperor of Allagan. This wasn't some primal, shaped in Zand's image, or a clone who believed itself to be the Emperor. Amon's knowledge and power was so great that he actually plucked the Emperor's soul from the lifestream and restored him to life in a much more powerful, immortal body. Now, I should clarify here that the immortality Amon achieved was not true immortality. He, Zand, and the others can be killed. However, they will never die of old age or illness, and honestly, with the might they possessed, it was unlikely any single warrior in the world could possibly stand against either of them and achieve victory. After his rebirth, Zand learned what had happened in the past millennia from Amon, and immediately set about restoring his empire. Zand had the current emperor assassinated, along with all of their loyal supporters, and he reclaimed his throne. The reborn emperor restored the size and might of his imperial army and quickly announced a new campaign. The empire would conquer the southern landmass of Mericidia. Zand wasted no time in beginning the invasion, and while the first few battles went well, given that they caught the Mericidians off guard, the empire's advance quickly ground to a halt. The Mericidians proved a powerful foe, particularly under the leadership of the Dawnworm Bahamut. The might of the dragons, combined with that of the Mericidians, gave the Empire exactly what it had lacked for the last 1,000 years: an enemy to overcome. Combat aetherochemistry research moved forward even faster than before, particularly in the area of chimeromancy. While Bahamut and his armies were able to repel the Allagan Empire for a time, the bioweapons being birthed by the Empire became more and more powerful, more resistant to the fangs, claws, and flames of the dragons, and eventually Bahamut himself was overpowered and slain. The Emperor believed that his conquest of Mericidia was all but assured after that, and he would have been right, if not for the sudden appearance of a new threat. The peoples of Mericidia began summoning the deities they worshipped in physical form to fight the Empire, something that, as far as historians know, had never been done before then in Mericidia or anywhere else. As for where the desperate Mericidian people learned the art of summoning and why they all started doing it at the same time, well, it's never been conclusively proven, but I think we all have a good idea. The Empire refused to acknowledge these great beings as true deities, instead dubbing them icons, but they could not deny the threat they posed. Some of the most dangerous of these icons were the three who would one day be called the Warring Triad: Sephiroth, the Fiend, Sophia, the Goddess, and Zurvan, the Demon. But the most powerful and dangerous of them all was the resurrected Bahamut, now known as the Dreadworm due to his vicious, tyrannical nature, far different from the noble ruler and protector he once was. How could the Empire prevail against incredibly powerful, monstrous enemies who would just be brought back to life time and again after they were killed? Zand demanded an answer to this question of his mages and technologists, proclaiming that for every day they didn't give him a solution, one of them would die. He was true to his word, and nothing motivates like a literal deadline. Before long, the Empire's scientists realized that the icons could be imprisoned, their powers nullified. Going further, they found ways of taming the icons and using them as near-limitless sources of energy. Since their essence never returned to the planet, they could not be resummoned, and instead added to the power of the Empire against the Mericidians. Meanwhile, Zand and his mages discovered another way to gain an advantage. Having already crossed the line of playing God by creating life, bringing back the dead, and granting immortality, they didn't hesitate when they found another line to cross. The Empire managed to make contact with the Void, a realm also known as the World of Darkness, filled with demonic creatures. Zand made a pact with the Cloud of Darkness, self-proclaimed ruler of the Void. The Empire would provide vessels for the Voidsent to inhabit in his world, and in return, these Voidsent would fight in his army. Zand didn't provide the Voidsent with his own soldiers, though. He didn't need to. He simply continued the battle against Mericidia. Every time a Mericidian soldier was defeated, its corpse was claimed by a Voidsent, and with each battle, the Empire's army swelled with undead. One after another, the Icons fell and were imprisoned, unable to hold out against the Empire's vast, ever-growing army. Bahamut lasted the longest, but he needed crystals in order to maintain his power to fight, and in time, the crystals became scarce due to overharvesting, while Zand's army only continued to grow. Eventually, Bahamut was overpowered again and imprisoned, and Mericidia finally fell to the Empire. Zand, immortal ruler of the Allagan Empire, now ruled over the entirety of the known world, since the landmass far, far to the west had still not been discovered by his people. As Amon hoped, the first emperor had not only restored the empire to the height of its power, but had propelled it even further. Atlag's might ruled over life, death, and even the godly icons. So, what was left now? Zand was unable to simply enjoy the peace and prosperity he had won. Between his literal return from death, his contact with the Void, years of war, and the fear of his empire declining, Zand's once brilliant mind began to slip into war-hungry madness. He only felt truly alive when he was fighting and conquering, leading his armies against a powerful foe. It was only when death loomed close that he felt the joy of life. He decided that he must have a new foe to fight, one so powerful and deadly that its might could drive the Empire to the very brink of death, also he could fight back against it. There was only one foe it could possibly be, the Cloud of Darkness. Zand decreed that the prison containing Bahamut should be encased in a massive iron sphere and sent up into space to orbit the moon. There, the fire-aspected icon could gather aether from the sun's light in far greater quantities than the feeble rays which reached the planet. The aether would then be used to tear open a massive void gate, allowing the Cloud of Darkness and her minions to invade the planet freely. Unsurprisingly, not all of the Emperor's servants liked this idea, and a massive rebellion rose up against him, but not before the first stage of his plan was set in motion. Despite Zan's own might and that of his loyal servants, such as Amon and Glacia Lavolas, the rebellion managed to force the Emperor to retreat to Circus Tower as his final defensive fortress. It's not known whether Zand believed he could bring his subjects back under his thumb with his plan, or whether he was just so enraged and crazy at this point that he didn't care. But either way, Zand activated Bahamut's sphere remotely, causing a flood of aether to crash down onto the tower. Circus Tower itself had been reinforced heavily and had no problem withstanding the flood of energy and consuming it, preparing to tear open the Void Gate. However, the Emperor and his engineers had made a fatal miscalculation. The force of the aether crashing down onto the tower was so great that the earth beneath the tower could not withstand it. The land shuddered, cracked, and broke apart, causing the tower to sink and preventing the gate from opening. This caused a chain reaction, resulting in earthquakes powerful enough to break mountains, erupting all over the Empire's lands. The death and destruction was beyond measure, worse than anything that had been seen in the world's history, and this event is known as the Fourth Umbral Calamity. As the tower descended, Amon worked a powerful time magic, sealing everyone inside the tower in a state of temporal stasis in a desperate attempt to preserve the Emperor and his plans. The Allagan Empire fell that day, buried with the tower. Without the Circus Tower providing power to them, most Allagan Machina ceased to function. Survivors of the calamity decided that the knowledge the Empire had amassed was the cause of the calamity, and many of the secrets it uncovered were never meant to be learned by mortals. What resulted was a war on learning, and on all things associated with aetherochemistry. Machina, books, informational records, weapons, mages and their recorded wisdom, everything that people could put their hands on was put to the torch. The people of Hydaelyn took a massive step backward in terms of technology and society, and what came next is known as the Forgotten Era. The people's war on learning meant that proper historical records were not made and maintained, and historians have only been able to find tiny fragments to hint at what the world was like. One very important thing we do know is that Zand had a young daughter who survived the calamity, Princess Selena. The princess had opposed her father's plans, but like much of the Empire, had realized too late that her father was slipping into madness and was powerless to stop him. She knew her father, his servants, and their creations were still alive beneath the ground, locked in time, but she didn't have the power to destroy them. What she did have, however, was the royal blood which allowed her to command not only the tower, but to an extent, the Cloud of Darkness itself. The pact Zand formed was not only with him, it was worded to include all of those of his blood, and as long as someone with the blood of the Emperor still lived on Hydaelyn, the Cloud of Darkness could be prevented from fully invading the world, and the technology hidden within the Crystal Tower could be prevented from being used for further evil. Selena entrusted her blood, and the secrets of Allag, to a Mikote whose true name is lost to history and is now known only as Desh. It is from Desh that the current-day G tribe of Mikote are descended, and once every generation there is one born with the Allagan Eye, proof of their inheritance of the Emperor's royal blood. Of course, we all know who that inheritor is in our time, everyone's favorite red-eyed catboy. For nearly 5,000 years, Circus Tower, now called the Crystal Tower, lies buried and dormant deep underground until, ironically, another calamitous event causes it to become unearthed. As for what happens next when the seal on the tower is broken, well, if you don't already know, you should play or watch the Crystal Tower questline yourself. It is required to play the newest expansion after all, and you'll want the knowledge you'll gain from the questline to give you context for the events of Shadowbringers. So, what's next? Is there something specific you'd like me to cover in my next video? If so, let me know in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching, and may you ever walk in the light of the crystal.